President Trump's trade war with American allies. Tariffs on imported goods are now at their highest levels since the Great Depression.
The United States has cautioned Canada against backing out of its purchase of American-made F-35 fighter jets, warning it of potential fallout if the deal is scrapped.
But let me tell Americans, we're not booing you. We're not booing your teams. We're not booing your players. We're booing a policy that is designed to hurt us.
What if the deadliest weapon in modern warfare isn't a missile, a drone, or even a cyber-attic, but something as simple as a closed wallet? That question became frighteningly real one weekend in Las Vegas, when a billionaire casino owner picked up the phone to hear the worst news of his career. His VIP suite sat empty, high roller tables stood silent, and his weekend revenue had collapsed by more than half. At first, the man thought it must be some kind of financial crisis, a sudden recession, or maybe even a new pandemic scare. But he was wrong. What had gutted his fortune overnight wasn't an invisible virus or a stock market crash. It was something far more devastating and far more deliberate. Nearly 38 million people had just disappeared from the American economy. Not literally vanished, they were still there, just north of the border in Canada, going about their lives as usual. But they had made one quiet, devastating decision. America no longer deserved their money. No tanks rolled. No cyber-attic melted Wall Street servers. No embargo blocked trade routes. Instead, millions of polite Canadians looked south, saw how Washington and Donald Trump had treated them, and shrugged, no thanks. The shock was immediate. Flights to Las Vegas that had once been filled with weekend warriors from Toronto and Vancouver suddenly had empty seats. Florida, long dependent on snowbirds who fled icy winters for sunny beaches, saw bookings collapse. Shopping trips to Buffalo and border towns, once a lifeline for small businesses, evaporated overnight. At first, Washington laughed it off. Trump mocked Canada as weak and dependent, even joking that the country might as well become America's 51st state. But the laughter died quickly as the numbers rolled in. Car trips from Canada into the U.S. dropped by nearly 40%. Flights to American vacation hotspots fell by a quarter. Canadian visitors to Las Vegas were cut almost in half. Florida alone lost over $6 billion in tourist spending. For one Orlando hotel manager, the shock was worse than anything he'd seen before. "I survived 9/11s, the crash, the lockdowns," he said. "But this, our best customers, just evaporated." On the northern border, entire towns began to crumble. Restaurants that had thrived for generations on weekend Canadian traffic saw their books collapse. Revenues falling by as much as 70% in a single year. Airlines canceled routes. Retail chains fired staff. Tourism boards slashed prices by 60%, desperate to lure back their most loyal visitors. Nothing worked. Why? Because this wasn't a seasonal dip. This wasn't a temporary slowdown. This was a boycott, a silent, disciplined, and devastating boycott. Canadian wallets had closed to America, and they weren't opening back up. And here's the brutal truth Washington didn't want to admit. Canada had been bankrolling America's tourism economy for decades. 1 out of every 5 foreign tourists in the US wasn't Chinese, British, or Japanese. They were Canadian, and they weren't just showing up. They were outspending nearly everyone else. So when Trump pushed too far with his insults, tariffs, and mockery, Canada didn't send tanks. They simply stopped sending tourists. And the effect was more damaging than any enemy nation could have dreamed. But why now? Why did Canada, the country so often stereotyped as polite, patient, and forgiving, suddenly snap? The answer wasn't one insult or one tweet. It was death by 1,000 cuts. First came the sneers. Trump's joke that Canada might as well be America's 51st state. Americans laughed. Canadians didn't. Then came the tariff tantrums. Steel, aluminum, and dairy all targeted like America was bullying the quiet kid in the schoolyard. Then came the NATO mockery, the Greenland stunt, the endless condescension. For Washington, it was just politics. For Canadians, it was confirmation of a bitter truth they had long suspected. America never saw them as equals, only as dependents. But the wound went deeper than Trump's tweets. Canadians still remembered the betrayal of the Avro Arrow, their own advanced jet program in the 1950s. It had been a moonshot project, a fighter jet decades ahead of its time. But Washington pressured Ottawa to scrap it and buy American. Canada folded. 14,000 jobs disappeared, and the nation's aerospace future was dismantled on an Ontario runway. That scar had never healed, and now, decades later, Canadians were done playing the junior partner. They were done bankrolling a neighbor who mocked their loyalty and treated them like a customer rather than a friend. The result was stunning. Without firing a single shot, Canada delivered one of the most devastating economic blows America had faced since the Great Depression. It wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, and it wasn't obvious at first. But it was effective, because in the 21st century, the scariest weapon isn't a missile or a bomb. It's the simple, silent act of saying, we're not spending our money on you anymore. And America's so-called deal-maker-in-chief never saw it coming. If the collapse of tourism blindsided America's casinos and border towns, what came next rattled the very heart of Washington's power, the defense industry. For decades, the United States had prided itself on being more than just an ally to Canada. It was the shield, protector, the senior partner. And with that role came expectations. Canada was supposed to fall in line, buy American jets, host American systems, and keep quiet when Washington called the shots. But for the first time in living memory, Ottawa didn't just hesitate. It defied. At the center of the storm was the F-35 Lightning II, the most expensive weapons program in human history. Touted as the future of air combat, the jet had soaked up $1.7 trillion in lifetime costs and years of delays. Washington wasn't simply encouraging Canada to buy it, they were demanding it. U.S. officials hinted that if Ottawa walked away, even NORAD, the joint shield that protects North American skies, might be at risk. In the past, Canada might have caved, but under Mark Carney's steady leadership, something changed. Instead of nodding along, Ottawa opened the bidding floor. Swedish Gripens, European Typhoons, non-American alternatives that were cheaper, more reliable, and better suited for Arctic defense. It was an act of quiet rebellion, and it sent shockwaves through Washington. Because here's the embarrassing truth. The F-35 wasn't the miracle jet it was sold as. Behind the Pentagon's glossy presentations, the aircraft was riddled with flaws. It was 5 years behind schedule, billions over budget. Barely half the fleet was combat-ready on any given day. Its engines overheated in cold climates, the very skies Canada needed to patrol. Helmets projected a green glow that blinded pilots at night, and the ejection seats, so dangerous that smaller pilots risked serious injury just by strapping in. Now compare that to Sweden's Gripen. Reliable, Arctic-ready, short runway, capable, 70% mission readiness. In other words, everything Canada actually needed. For Canadians, the message was clear. Why should they bankrupt themselves for a jet that worked half the time just to keep Washington happy? The U.S. answered with one word: loyalty. To them, this wasn't about capability. It was about obedience. Buying the F-35 was supposed to be proof that Canada knew its place. But Canada wasn't buying it, literally or figuratively. And that's when America's nightmare truly began. Because once one ally proves resistance is possible, others start taking notes. Mexico watched as Canadian snowbirds pulled billions from the U.S. economy without firing a shot and thought, could we do that? European leaders saw Ottawa push back on the F-35 and whispered, what if we stopped signing blank checks too? Even Japan, Washington's most loyal Asian ally, began deepening its ties with Southeast Asia, hedging its bets in case American pressure turned their way next. The unspoken fear in Washington was this: America's empire wasn't built by conquest like Rome. It was built on partnership. Allies signed up for the American century because it felt profitable, safe, beneficial. But what happens when that partnership starts to look less like cooperation and more like subordination? Canada had just provided the answer. Allies don't fight back with bombs or speeches. They fight back with silence, with redirection, with wallets closed, and the ripple effects were enormous. While U.S. tourism boards panicked, Canadian money didn't vanish. It simply flowed elsewhere. Mexico's beaches filled with Canadian visitors. European hotels saw bookings surge. Asian resorts launched marketing campaigns in Canadian dollars. The message couldn't have been clearer: treat us with respect, and you'll get our business. Treat us like a colony, and we'll take it somewhere else. But beyond tourism, something far more threatening was happening. Canada was rewriting its role in the world, bypassing Washington in ways that no one thought possible. Joint Arctic surveillance with Nordic allies, drone tech sharing with Europe, defense procurement without a single American signature. For the first time in decades, Ottawa was building security relationships that didn't run through the Pentagon. And here's the most humiliating part for Trump's team. None of this was done with fiery speeches or Twitter rants. It was done with precision, patience, and quiet calculation. Canada simply walked away, and America had no defense against it. Washington had always believed it held the upper hand. After all, what small ally would dare defy the world's superpower? But Canada proved the assumption false. Not with tanks, not with sanctions, but with a whisper. We don't need you as much as you think we do. And that whisper is spreading. Mexico, Europe, even Asia are starting to ask the same question. If Canada can push back, why can't we? For America, the danger is clear. Its empire doesn't collapse with an explosion. It erodes with every ally that decides Washington's demands no longer make sense. With every partner who shifts their dollars, their contracts, their alliances somewhere else. The lesson should terrify Washington strategists. In today's world, respect isn't enforced, it's earned. And if the United States forgets that, then one day, it might wake up just like that casino owner in Las Vegas to find the tables empty, the rooms deserted, and the empire crumbling quietly from within.